I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, February 13th, 2023, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome, members of the community here tonight to observe the important work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders. Dr. Hammond, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, we do. So we have, in addition to the school resource officer report, we did include the current school resource officer agreement with the city. We did update the superintendent's operation and strategic plan update, just some honing of some of the components of the budget planning process. There's a number of personnel items, including appointments, increase, decrease, change in assignment, leaves of absence, and there is one resignation. And then that is the table file for tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Jeff, second by Amy. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Do we have public comment? Anybody signed up? Okay, so we will skip to item 4, which is announcements and recognitions.
And I have no announcements nor recognitions this evening.
Okay, do you want to give us the details of your upcoming trip? Well, you will hopefully win.
Certainly. So what Claudia is referring to is I'll leave Wednesday afternoon for the National Conference on Education. It is the National Superintendent's Conference and other central office administrators. It's in San Antonio, Texas. And on Thursday afternoon, all 50 states superintendents of the year will be recognized. And then myself and the other 3 finalists will be recognized, and they will announce the honoree for 2023 for the National Superintendent of the Year. So I will do my best to, I will do my best to not embarrass any of you, number one. And then again, just really grateful for the opportunity. I have shared this with a few people that I really wish that all of the superintendents in the state could have the recognition, because it is really a special thing to be able to get to engage with these national leaders in a different way. So I appreciate all the support here, and we will do the best to we will represent you well, is what I will say.
Very good. Well, we're proud of you and wish you best of luck. And that announcement is
And
actually
just to be
gonna
clear,
live-streamed.
it is going to be live streamed, and just be clear, AASA is paying for all of the stuff. So it's no district money.
Very nice. Okay, board members, do you have any recognitions or announcements you'd like to make? Okay, good. We're on to item 5, our discussion and reports. And first, we have the school resource officer report. Presenting tonight are the Northfield High School Assistant Principal Rico Boren, the Middle School Assistant Principal Michael O'Keefe, Police Chief Mark Elliott, and our school resource officer Gabriel Crombie. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, school board, for having us tonight. I'm Michael O'Keefe, assistant principal at the middle school. And I just want to put on public record there, I think at one point in time, it did say Principal Michael O'Keefe. So if Mr. Gillino was watching, I had nothing to do with that. I've been asked tonight to talk a little bit about our school resource officer, the role of school resource officer. And before we jump into our work tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the district vision. As you all know, this is how we start all of our district meetings. So it's prudent for us to just have a second to reread our district vision. And we're going to wrap that into our strategic commitments as well. These 6 strategic commitments I am going to present tonight. We're going to be presenting tonight. You're going to see a lot of this vocabulary come up in our engagement with the school resource officer. In particular, people, communication, and partnerships. We are dedicated to making sure that our strategic commitments are met. I believe that the role of our SRO aligns with multiple commitments. And tonight, like I said, you will hear how our SRO supports our commitment to these strategic commitments. So let's jump in a little bit here real quickly. It's always nice to put a name and a face together. We often refer to our school resource officer as Officer Crombie, but he is here tonight. So I would like to formally introduce you all to Officer Gabriel Crombie with the Northfield Police Department, and he's going to speak a little bit about himself. So we've got a little background as we talk about the position tonight. So Officer Crombie, if you're coming up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself, talk a little bit about my background, and then I think we'll go on and kind of talk about the SRO role in the different schools and kind of what my job looks like. So I'm Officer Crombie. I've been a Northfield police officer for about 3 years now. Before that, I worked for Rice County Social Services in the Child and Family Unit. I was a youth minister for a number of years and had like a manufacturing background before that, but decided to leave the private sector and go into public service. And this is the best job I've ever had. I've been the SRO for about a year now, and it's been wild. So I have an office out of the high school. I work in the middle school, Bridgewater, Spring Creek, Greenville Park Elementaries, and then I also am upstairs at our area learning center. I work with some of the online students if the need arises, but really if the schools need something, I'm your guy. Many teachers have kids in the school and they see me all the time. I had a high school principal tell me that they were told by their son at the middle school, it's like, oh, there were 5 police officers at the middle school today. Nope, there was just one, and it was just me. So it's kind of fun to have that presence. I think that now we're going to move to the high school and kind of get into the details about what this role looks like in a practical sense. Oh,
I'm up.
Mr. Oki?
Yeah, I'm up. And it should be noted that this is literally the best picture that's ever been taken of Gabriel Crombie. Not just because I'm saying that, but because he literally admitted it to me at dinner tonight. That is the best picture that's ever been taken of me. So we'll make sure you get this file so you can have it on hand. Right. I wanted to just come out of the gate to just remind people what the 4 pillars of the school resource officer partnership was built on. It is driven by relationships, communication, support, and instruction. And as you can see from our slide here, there are different avenues in which those 4 pillars are met, but we're going to do some deep dive on these tonight, just from personal experiences. Rico and I are going to talk about these pieces very specifically and what the role looks like within our buildings. So relationships, communication, support, and instruction. When I think of the school resource officer, I've been working at Northfield Middle School for 8 years. This is year 24 in education for me in 3 different school districts. Every district that I've worked in has had a school resource officer. And I think there are pieces to the role that we've all come to rely on. But in particular in Northfield, I believe the role for the last 8 years has been these 3 bullet points. It is a resource for families and students. Prime example is if you take a look at this photograph, this was from our career exploration fair that we had at the middle school a couple of years ago. And in partnering with our SRO at the time, Bart Weiss, he had connections and inroads with law enforcement, so that when we had our career exploration fair and we knew we wanted to have those opportunities to be presented, he started networking almost immediately for us. This young woman who was a law enforcement trainee at the time is actually a Northfield grad. And so Bart reached out to her, and we reached out to Alexandria Tech through some of his other connections. And we brought them into our career exploration fair. And it was a really great opportunity for our students. Every 7th and 8th grade student participated. And all the sophomores and some select juniors participated in this career exploration fair. If you can't tell in that picture, we have 2 young ladies that were connecting with a female law enforcement officer. That's exactly what we wanted to see happen. And we can thank our school resource officer for bringing those connections directly to our campus and presenting. So as a resource, we do lean into our SRO for many different things. It takes a special person to work with middle school students. I mean, I freely admit that to you. And some of you know what I'm talking about as parents of some of our middle school students. When I think about the SRO, we do need backup. And I admit that sometimes we don't have the bandwidth as professionals to navigate all that teen and preteen behavior and some of those things that we're seeing. So I rely on our SRO to help me out in situations where I need that extra bandwidth. So in particular, I believe, and I've seen over the course of the last 10 years, the connectivity of students, whether it's social media or cell phones, the connectivity has really crossed over into some situations within school. So they are so much more connected outside of school, interacting with each other. And a lot of those times, those situations can create problems that then roll into our hallways. And that is where we can rely on a school resource officer to help us unpack some of those things. I don't get to go home with all the students at 251 every day at the middle school. They go home into whatever environment they're in. And sometimes I need a little backup and giving me some ideas, or how do I connect with a certain family? And that's where people like Officer Crombie come into play, where I can give him a text or I can give him a call, and he can help support me with some behaviors that are happening outside of school. And so that role helps us navigate some of those behaviors. I want to put in front of you a really concrete example of this. Officer Crombie got a hold of me last week and said, "Are you aware of this new Snapchat filter?" And I said, "Nope, please teach me." And so his experiences in working outside the school, he was able to show us a, was it Snapchat?
Yes.
Or was it Instagram?
No, it's TikTok.
It was a TikTok filter that involved a Nerf gun. I'll leave it right there, but I would have never had that information if he hadn't worked with some students that had worked through that situation. And so there's a sense of normalcy, right? Like that was designed for that age group to use, but then it came right into our building. And when it came into our building, we connected with Officer Crombie to help us kind of navigate our response to that. The third one I want to talk about is the follow through on the student citizenship handbook. We need support in certain situations where if it's maladaptive behavior that I can address, I feel really good about that. But there are going to be circumstances where we need that backup when there is something bigger than the school in their response. So if there was an assault, or if there was some sort of vandalism that was to a certain degree of damage, we do work with law enforcement to help respond to that. In our student citizenship handbook, there is police referral written into some of the outcomes, the administrative outcomes. And so as a middle school administrator, there have been dozens of times where I've had to rely on our support from the SRO to follow through on some pieces that we're investigating that does require the support of Northfield Police Department or local municipalities, depending on where that student lives. So just kind of in recap, that partnership, resource for families, obviously helping us to address, navigate the preteen and teen behaviors that we're seeing and the changes in their behaviors, and then any follow-up on the citizenship handbook that we have. Okay. I would like to introduce a very good friend of mine, Rico Bourne, Northfield High School assistant principal, who's going to talk a little bit about his SRO partnership.
School Board, Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it all day. I told Gabriel your head's going to be bigger by the time you walk out of here, because we absolutely adore and need him in our schools. He's been a huge proponent. I have a lot of stuff written down. I have a lot of wild things going on in my head. I wish I could just share them all with you. But the matter of fact that Mr. O'Keefe and I work with Officer Crombie behind closed doors, and not many people get to see the true craft that this officer brings to our school district, our community, and to our families. I came in 2020 at the height of COVID, so I never really got to see NHS at its running usual school routine. I came from the cities, and the SRO position at the cities, in my experience, were not what I came here and found out. A lot of the time they were sought after positions in the cities because of a 8-to-3 job. It was a good job to have. They didn't connect with kids. Racially fractured lines up that you see up there and all around our country today weren't healed. They were exasperated, I think, a little bit. So having someone like Officer Crombie come in through COVID was huge. When you have no beds for kids in terms of hospitals, mental health hospitals, when you have waiting lists, someone who is well versed and has that background was amazing with kids. I still kind of get choked up thinking about all the kids that we had that were hurting mentally. And not only did he help with that, but he had resources at his fingertips that we don't have, that he enacted. Trauma-informed techniques were huge in the high school. We talk about resilience with kids and how they're resilient, but I think approaching that with a trauma-informed lens was something that was new to me as well, and learned a lot. Not only did we do this work together, but afterwards we would reflect, what could we do better? What could we improve on? And that's kind of a daily thing that we do even today, Gabriel and I. Misconceptions about police, I put that in there, and I know that is a topic that we kind of shy away from, but I think that's a hard topic that we all still need to have. I know I have some students in Northfield, even in Northfield, that might have misconceptions about the police. Any random day that you see Officer Crombie, he's walking around, he's engaging verbally, getting in his businesses, like I like to say, disrupting the flow of traffic, in the gym, shooting hoops, just visible and very approachable. So that is new to me. Parents are huge. There are times Mr. O'Keefe talked about when we are faced with situations where fights occur, unfortunately, damages occur, unfortunately, and parents need to be called. Parents don't understand. Sometimes they look at the school and they look at the law enforcement, and we are one. We're not one. We're like oil and water. We don't mix. He is one entity and school is another entity, but we work together well to take care of our parents and to educate our parents every step of the way. Even in the court systems, he is letting parents know what to expect, how you might receive some sort of piece of mail from the county, and what would be the next steps to get through all of it. So I look at Minneapolis, and sometimes I shake my head about the relationship that they banished from that school district, and think, wow, I just so lucky that we have that here, because the it factor, I'll finish up with the it factor. In education, we like to say that, but we don't really know how to define it. But Bart had it, and so does Gabriel, and we're just a better school district. He said it himself, it's a dream job. I think that's a great thing. I think that signifies what I've seen the past 2 years with him, and we look forward to more, saving kids' lives. Thank you. Any questions at all? High school. Yeah. The next slide. Officer Crombie.
So we've kind of covered the high school portion of what I do in the middle school, but you know, there's a lot of school district to cover. So one of the aspects, or one of the ways that we engage with our students, is through the DARE program. So we have the DARE program taught in all the 5th grade classes. We kind of rotate the schools, and we teach at Greenvale, then at Spring Creek, then at Bridgewater. So all of our 5th graders throughout the year will have 11 weeks of the DARE program. We have 3 DARE officers that teach, and we kind of take turns rotating in and out. And so I'll teach 2 classes, my partner will teach 2 classes, and really, so we kind of have dedicated classes that we get to connect with and really build relationships with. The curriculum is really centered around positive decision-making. I think when people hear about the DARE, they automatically think of drugs. The program has been around a long time, and it's changed, it's evolved quite a bit. So now it's really about positive decision-making, and the context of positive decision-making will change each week depending on the lesson. Whether that be tobacco and alcohol use, kind of like the classic DARE program, but also really about communication and expressing your emotions, social media use, bullying, but also stress management and self-care, which is kind of an interesting topic to teach with 5th graders, which is pretty fun. And really so we meet once a week for an hour, but we also work really hard to collaborate with the 5th grade teachers so that our program will synergize with them and not conflict with the schedules that they have going on or the topics that they're teaching with. We really work together to say, what can we do to really benefit this class in whatever season you're in, whether at the beginning of the year with Greenvale, towards the end of the year with Bridgewater. We work really hard. The curriculum has its benefits, But I would say that the DARE curriculum is really secondary for the opportunity to build personal connection with the students. We spend 11 weeks with these students and really it's fun all the way. Really, we're working just these DARE officers, myself or my partners, we really become trusted adults in the lives of these students, people that they can see in the community, that they can approach and talk to, whether it's at football games or later when they're at the middle school or at the high school or after they graduate and they're in our community and really creates lifelong connections. Right now, Chief Elliott is a former DARE officer and he still has his former DARE students reaching out to him in various ways, which is pretty cool. We also, as with our opportunity to teach DARE, we recognize this may be the only time that these students ever have connection with law enforcement or an experience with law enforcement. So we take that really seriously. We want to use it to kind of like humanize police and humanize law enforcement, and then also help grow the Northfield community to trust in the Northfield PD. And really that's our vision behind it. So the curriculum is great, but really it's about that personal connection. And I think with that, I'll have the chief come on up. Hit the next slide.
School board members, thank you for having us here tonight. I'm Mark Elliott, Police Chief here in Northfield. And as Gabriel said, a former DARE instructor and former school resource officer as well. I certainly understand the importance of this program and the partnership with the school district. And I appreciate your support that you've shown over the years. We're partners in safety, and we just need to look as far back as Friday in St. Paul and understand that we have safety concerns in our schools. Our schools are a microcosm of our community. And things that happen in the schools happen in the community. Things that happen in our community happen in the schools. And we want to try to provide a safe setting. Some of those things that have been talked about, that information sharing that goes on really 24/7 between the school administration and our officers, which is usually filtered through our SRO, helps keep everyone as safe as can be. Partners in security, making sure the building is secure, practicing those things like lockdown drills to respond if we have emergencies, and working with the school on that, working with the maintenance staff as well to make sure that if there are any security issues, those get addressed right away. And partners in student potential. Our students are our future. We were all students once, and I look at you folks leading now, probably didn't think that you'd be doing that when you were in DARE class or elementary or middle school. But we do know that we are a partner in developing their potential. And that is meeting their needs. I've heard about mental health needs. It could be substance use, could be family issues. And we want to be there for the students and work with them. We work with other providers, mental health providers, social workers, day in, day out in the work that we do. And being able to be in that school setting and help navigate that and help connect folks and families for positive outcomes is important. The partners in community investment, thanks for showing the slide from Career Day. I like that one, very positive. But one of those partnerships in the community development or in community investment was the development of the Northfield Community College Collaborative for law enforcement students. And that came out of a couple students that are interested in being police officers and said, we would like to go to school in our community. It's family-wise, it's really tough for us to go away to college. Is there something we could do locally? And thankfully, we had really good folks at the Northfield Community College Collaborative that said, hey, can we do something like this? And we partnered with them to bring that program from Riverland right here in town. And that program really is targeted towards those that are mostly underrepresented in law enforcement. When we look at people of color or at females, grossly underrepresented in law enforcement. And that program really is geared towards that. And it helps grow our own. We have about a third of our department are Northfield High School graduates. And we like that. That means that we're investing in our community now, and we're investing in our police department and community later. And lastly, just partners in trust. We want to build strong, trusting relationships. That starts out in our DARE program, moves through SRO, and really Officer Crombie does a great job of representing the rest of the officers too, to hopefully build that trust throughout the community. Thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll take some questions.
Very good. Thank you so much for your presentation. Appreciate you. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Robert.
Well, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate the student-centered nature of this report. It's clear we're doing good work, building relationships and trust between the Northfield PD and our students. And I think it's clear that we've had great people in this SRO role here for the last few years, and I'm sure that plays a major role in making this positive relationship. And I hope we're able to continue to serve as a model of what this kind of relationship should be between schools and our police force. Keeping with this student focus, I do have a question, and this is for our administrators, about how our students are perceiving safety. I think our students take the Minnesota Student Survey every couple of years, and I'm wondering how our students are feeling about safety in schools.
So I can share some information on that. Robert had given me the heads up that he was going to have this question tonight. So I do have, Tim, if you can switch to me here. I do have just, what we did is I had our instructional services department. So I plugged in here, Tim, if you can. So our instructional services department put together just some data based on the last several student surveys. So Minnesota Student Survey is conducted every 3 years. It is conducted with students who are in grades 5, 8, 9, and 11. So we had them pull the 4 questions that we think are 4 questions that are related here. So students feeling safe at school is what I have up here right now. And so what you'll see is that we have seen a decrease. And I'm sure people have read about this in the national press as well, that, we've seen lots of people, but students especially, right, who are not feeling as safe as they once did. And so this question is, I feel safe at school. The grade level is all 4 of them. So we have seen a decrease since 2013 from the number of students who agree or strongly agree. We're looking at around, 95% or so. These are rounded. So this in 2013, we're looking at around 95% to 22, where we're looking at about 90%. Now, I think the important part is that 90% of students agreeing or strongly agreeing that they feel safe at school is a good thing. I think we'd agree that, but we also are trying to learn and determine why is it different, than it was in 2013. But what you'll also notice is that you see a similar pattern in all of the questions that are asked to students. So students are actually indicating that they're feeling just slightly less safe at home than they did, even back in 2013. Again, these numbers are fairly similar, but the number from strongly agree to agree obviously changed in the last few years. You also can take a look at feeling safe going to and from school. So again, we've seen a decrease, in that over time, more so between, people moving from that strongly agree to agree component. And then finally, even I feeling safe in my neighborhood has also declined. So we are just seeing in general, students feeling less safe in a number of different, some of these I do think, remember, they just asked this question, I feel safe. That is something different to students, right? It could mean that they could feel for their physical safety. For some of these, especially in 2022, when they're asking this at the end of the pandemic, it very well could have been about a health and a health concern. And one of the, I think, one of the limitations of the Minnesota Student Survey is that because it's a statewide implementation, there's no practical way for them to collect freehand comments. So when we do a survey in our school district, right, we are always asking for what are those comments to be able to try to help provide some context to a rating. The Minnesota Student Survey doesn't provide that. Now, we can learn from some other surveys, cross-referencing. But so I think that what we've seen just in society in general, especially coming out of the pandemic, I think if you look at many questions about I feel safe, I think you've seen a reduction in that. And as Chief Elliott said, schools are microcosms of their community. And so I think it's good data for us to have. And so that's where students would feel. I'll go back to the part here where it says I feel safe at school. So I still think we're in very good shape. But we still have some understanding to do as why is it different today than it was in 2013. I think we all have some hypotheses, and our school administrators who are working directly with students every day can tell you some of the things that they see different. And I do think if you think about the difference in social media use between 2013 and now, obviously that's a game changing player. But that's the data to answer your question, Robert.
Good question. Thank you for sharing that. Any other comments or questions? Amy?
This is for Gabriel. Thanks for becoming our school resource officer. And I am very impressed with everything you've said so far. My question is about our strategic commitment to equity and how you see that playing out in your role as a school resource officer.
Well, I would say that a lot of the times when I am called to respond, there's a kind of a number of channels that things go through before they get to me. So I think our administrators do a really good job of addressing issues as they come up in an equitable way. And then by the time that it gets to me, really, if there is a criminal action involved, then it's pretty black and white in terms of like, was a crime committed or was a crime not committed? And so in the context of kind of like networking and resources, I've got a lot of connections with social services and things like that. My wife is a social worker, so got the inside scoop. Then a lot of times it's just a matter of like, okay, well, what resources are available and what ways can we assist these families in the way that, you know, what's available, what resources are available, and can we connect them with the right people to get those? So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm trying my best here. There's, like I said, a lot of it is handled before I get there. And a lot of times it's easy for me to just say, okay, what's the next step? Does law enforcement need to be involved in this? And, you know, a lot of times, no, it's not. A lot of times, yes, it is. And we just take it from there according to statute.
I'd like to ask Michael and Rico and Mark the same question. How would you respond to that?
Can you state your question again so that I fully
Basically,
understand it?
How our strategic goal of equity
Mhm.
plays out in terms of the school resource officer?
Okay. With our vision statement, meaning that every student reaches their full potential. The equity piece is about fair opportunities and making sure that we get every student their best chance at being successful. So that's a tough one. That's a tough one, Amy. I look at this as Gabriel had said, we refer to the SRO in events where there is a piece in the student citizenship handbook that asks for it. And then there are times when we're asking Gabriel to just come and be human. And so there's some different hats that are worn there. So I don't want to answer that question. There's different avenues, right, in which to answer that piece. Gabriel comes into the middle school and we ask him to, and he, like he said, he follows through on the student citizenship handbook. I don't know how that ties into the equity piece that you're questioning, but on a personal level, I see him all the time coming into the middle school, not because we've asked him to do that, but he's come in and he's interacting with the students. He's providing resources. He's eating lunch. I'm not trying to put you on the spot there, but we've got a really good middle school lunch program. He will come in and eat middle school lunch with us. And to me, that's an equal access to our law enforcement and equal access to our school resource officer in times when things aren't going sideways, right? Like I really try to prioritize him getting FaceTime with our students when something isn't going sideways on us. So to me, that's where I wanted to take your question was that's that equal access to Gabriel, Bart, Angela, the 3 SROs that I've worked with, is getting them into our building and letting them see that he is a human, that this role is a person that wants to help and support our students.
Thank you.
Amy, great question. I think that equity, I've talked to Gabriel many times face to face and have said, you know what, Gabriel, that's equity work. And I think we talk about that a lot. I don't know if he remembers that, but I certainly do. And equity is giving every student everything that they need in order to be successful. And I really think the intangibles that he brings to the job, just showing up as a human, like O'Keefe says, he shows up during COVID in a time that we need innovation because kids aren't coming to school. I can't throw kids in my car. What does he do? He goes out and he gets them. That's an example of equity work right there, giving that child what they need, not understanding that background. And that's just one of a million that just comes off the top of my head. There's not a prescribed job description that he comes in and says, I can't bend on this. You need this, I'm going to make it work. And that goes even today outside of COVID too. So we got a rock star here. And I've never seen, you've been through 3, I've been through 2, but I've been through many up in the cities, and this doesn't even compare. And Robert said, I hope we can keep that partnership with Northfield because it's healthy. It's very, very healthy here. And kids are better for it, even when they see what's happening on the news. So, and that's the biggest talk that I have with my kids of color, is that we respect these the police department, and they're like, yes, Mr. Bourne, absolutely. You know, those are stereotypes that come and corrupt some of our kids' minds. So, and like I said, he dispels a lot of them. He transcends them and gets rid of them. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Great question. Anyone else?
Mark was
Oh, I'm
next.
sorry. I'm sorry,
No,
Mark.
that's
ahead.
fine. I'll just briefly follow up on that, in that the work that your school administrators do and the work that Gabriel does in the school really match when you look at equity, in that each student is different. Each one is unique. They have different needs. They respond differently, and they really do a good job of that. Some students, just that one word of saying, hey, let's make sure we're acting right. And that's all it takes. And others, it's a lot more than that. It's sitting down and understanding what's going on with them today and taking the time to do that. And that's the equity work that I've seen Gabriel do. Taking the extra time for those students who you can tell need a little extra time. Have been able to witness them do that in the lunchroom at Greenville Elementary, where he had some very energetic students that wanted his time, and he took and made that time for him, where other students there was just a simple wave or a smile from him. And, that's all they needed to feel held by him. So I see that in the work that he does. And I think I see that in the work that my officers do throughout the community, but him at the school, we definitely see that. So it's playing to each student, each situation differently to make sure that it is handled equitably, not necessarily equally, so that they can meet the full needs of that student or family.
Thank you.
Excellent. Other questions? Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for your report. I guess what I can see, and I'm kind of picking up from administrative point and a law enforcement point, is you guys are really working together as a team, and you're kind of finding what's going on behind the scenes and just trying to be, the word that comes to mind is just, approachable and accountability. And I think that regardless of any student's background or whatever, we want to treat everybody the same and have a high standard of dignity, honor, and respect. But also, if somebody's crossing the line to get into where they're breaking laws, that there's an intervention there. This is the United States, and we're a nation of laws, and we have things. And I think that there's a lot of people, regardless of whatever their belief is, that just kind of have a problem with authority issues. And I think that it's kind of neat if you're playing basketball, walking around, or you can just kind of open up a conversation and have some, because a lot of people just haven't been exposed to police officers or anything, and just kind of like, wow, that guy's a real human being, and I can talk to him, and he'll be actually help me, and he's my friend. And I think that's really good stuff. So I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else? Corey.
Thanks for the collective presentation. I have a question for Gabriel. You were talking about the DARE program being 11 weeks long at each school. Can you talk a little bit about how the setup is for those classes? Is it class by class? Is it auditorium where everyone comes together, the entire 5th grade? Then how many student hours do you have over those 11 weeks? Is it 1 hour a week? Does it vary week by week depending on the programming? Just kind of curious how much time those students get with you or your 2 counterparts.
Sure. So right now we've got 4 5th grade classes at each elementary school. The easiest example would be right now we're teaching through DARE at Spring Creek. So Spring Creek, every Thursday from 1 until 3 o'clock, we teach DARE. So we do an hour class in the fifth grade classroom for that specific teacher. And then I'll pack up my stuff and move to the next classroom and teach for an hour there. So with the transition, it ends up being, about 58 minutes per class right in their classroom. I know that Greenville Park likes to, their students kind of transition between classrooms, even independent of the DARE program. So at Spring Creek, I would teach in one classroom and then come back later and teach in that same classroom for an hour. There's about anywhere from 18 to 25 students in each class. And so between the two DARE officers, that's how we cover all 4 classes. So about 2 hours a week.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hey, Jenny.
I actually just have a comment. I wanted to thank you all for your presentation, not only for coming here and talking to us, but also in the work that you do every single day, the work that we don't see. So we see you here today making a presentation, but we don't actually see the work that you do. And I know you're doing your best to tell us what you do. But I am fortunate enough to have talked to a lot of middle school and high school students and their parents. I'm very active with keeping in touch with folks, and every one of them has mentioned the resource officer in the schools. And, of course, they have stories and everything, and they're all very positive, which is hard to come across nowadays when you're talking to especially high schoolers and their parents. But it's all been real positive. And so I think that's important that you have that feedback, and also my own feedback, because I love the saying, every child is one caring adult away from a success story. And so we're lucky enough to not only have a full-time adult come in from the street kind of and talk to our kids and be around them, but someone who's actually an officer. So they have a lot of, you have resources, to put certain students in touch with if they need to take things a step further. And so I hear about that a lot too. And so I just really wanted to thank you for all of that and for collaborating together.
Thank you. Anyone else, comments or questions? Okay, I've got a couple of comments or questions here. Thank you again to all of you for an excellent presentation. And of course, the relationship that the district has with the Northfield Police Department is amazing. You only hear good things about that. And I've seen the chief at many of the community meetings that I've been a part of. So I'm just very impressed. I have a couple questions for Gabriel. If you could expand on what I needed to hear how many hours you spend at the district. So a typical week, what does that look like for you? Are you at somewhere in the district all day? Is it some days, only mornings, that kind of thing? And then also if you could touch on what does the district, from your perspective, what does the district need that only a school resource officer can offer?
These are good questions, really good questions. I'll start with the easy one, which is what does my day typically look like? So I work school hours. I start at 7:15 and then I end at 3:15 when the school day is out. That's kind of that's what I put on my time card, but really it tends to go much beyond that. I find myself staying late often because of course things happen right at the end of the day when school gets out, of course. But so I have an office out of the high school and I typically start my days at the high school. A lot of it is catching up on just kind of getting what information is available that maybe I can pass on to the schools. A lot of like any information that I can pass on to say like, hey, there was a critical incident that happened at the community. Maybe there was a car crash and people were injured. Were there students involved? Were there students' parents involved? Could a student be having a really difficult day because of this critical incident that happened outside of school? That's information that it's good to know that I'll pass on to the administrators and say, hey, how can we support the student in this way? So most of my time is spent at the high school because that's the students that I end up engaging with most. But I kind of alternate between high school. In the mornings, I like to spend a lot of afternoons at the middle school. I try and go to every school in the district at least one time a week, just to check in and say, hey, I'm here, I'm available. Do you have anything going on? Sometimes it's like people run things by me, say, hey, I have this situation. We're not sure if it's law enforcement related or not. I find that law enforcement in general are pretty good at just mediating conflict. And as we know, there's lots of conflict in the world, and it doesn't always, it's many times there are no laws broken, even though there's conflict. So it can be just sitting down and talking with students, say, hey, how's your day going? What's going on here? I hear things are not great between you and your friend. Can we talk about this? Can we unpack this? How can we make sure that you are really thriving in school, and that you're not concerned or not wanting to come to school because of this conflict that's happening? It's tough to describe what a typical day looks like, because there are so many students that everybody's day looks different and everybody has their own challenges. There can be times where I'm responding to one of the elementary schools because we have maybe a student that has some special services that really doesn't want to be at school. And so now they're leaving the campus. So I'll go and I'll communicate, hey, what's going on today? Can you tell me about how your day is? Can you tell me maybe why you don't want to go to school? I know it's cold out here. Can I give you a ride back to the school? Would you like, or I can walk with you if you would feel more comfortable that way? Even sometimes me just driving up to that school and then they see, oh, there's a marked police car. Oh, this means business now. Maybe I should listen to the school administrator who's been trying to convince me to come back to the school. And a lot of times I don't even have to say anything, but just the presence there can kind of show students, the beauty of being an SRO is I get to engage with students every day, but in some cases, I don't have to see them every day. So like a parent, it's one thing if your parent tells you to do this, and then they have to see their child every day. And then if somebody else tells them to do the same thing, suddenly it just becomes what they do. And I get to reap the benefit of that in many ways. So also a lot of my time is documentation. There's a lot of things that may not be criminal activity, but definitely worth documentation, making sure that we're covered, making sure that we have a clear record of this student needed resources, and these are the resources that we were able to apply to that. Or there was a threat of violence that occurred towards a school, and we did our due diligence to investigate it to its fullness, and we discovered in the investigation, which might include interviews with students, interviews with parents, interviews with staff, home visits, whatever it be, we leave no stone unturned to make sure that this threat is unfounded or it's not credible, or that we have the students are safe and they can feel safe because somebody has looked into it. So, and whether that's during school hours or at 7 o'clock at night, because somebody sent something on Snapchat and needs to be looked into immediate, it's kind of an all hours type of thing. So there are typical days, but no day is typical. And then the second question you asked.
Well, I feel like you've touched on it in your answer here, but it was about what is it specifically that the SRO offers the district that, say, another adult couldn't offer. And so it sounds like some of those investigative pieces. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add any more to it, but
maybe just a little bit. I mean, there is something to do with, there's a security aspect that we can really include to the school. I mean, we have resources, we have collaboration, not just with law enforcement, but also with paramedics and with fire and with even a lot of close connections with social services, because when social services goes to make home visits, a lot of times they'll take law enforcement with. And so just the kind of the flow of information, but then also the speed of resources. Like, it's really easy. I have a radio on me that I can request an ambulance immediately. And that just saves time. I think we had in one instance, we had the lockdown, kind of the panic alarm, like the worst alarm that you could ever pull at Bridgewater Elementary was pulled on accident. But we didn't know that. And so our response time was 32 seconds. So that's how fast we got there from when we were notified. There's all sorts of alarms that go off on my cell phone and in emails and in dispatch and earpieces. Really, it's the speediness of a response. If we have a critical incident at any of the Northfield schools, it's nice, we are there immediately. If we're not in the building, we are there as fast as possibly. We're eliminating any middle person, just the delay in calling, so that, and I think that also students seeing me know that he's in uniform. If there's a medical event, that they know, okay, help has arrived and it's right here, and that's easily recognizable, so.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And then for our principals, I have a question for you. So what I want to draw is how you value the SRO position. And of course, you gave us a terrific, thorough presentation already. But I wanted to hear you speak more specifically about how the position of the SRO helps you supports you in your role.
This role has been, since I've started, there's been an SRO, and from the get-go, from the very first dangerous situation, we tapped into that SRO, and I watched as a young administrator who hadn't needed to dial 911 a whole lot, having that SRO right there. They coached me through some of that stuff, and I've been able to share some of my wisdom with Gabriel in this role, and he's been able to share a lot of his wisdom with me on what other agencies he would do here or there. Like, if I had to hit a home run with you right now, it would be, we had a student that was going through a mental health crisis, and it was after hours on a weekend. And I think, the idea that he respects me enough to text me on a Saturday night at 7:14 p.m. to say, what do you know about this student before I send my people out? And I can call him and say, this is what I know. This is what happened at school on Friday. Now his people are prepped with the information going into that situation. They can handle it the way that they need. And I think like the piece that makes this really feel good is then on Monday morning, he's been out to the house. That student trusts me because they see me every day. We can sit down and have a conversation and unpack some of that with the parents' blessing. And sometimes the parents come with us. But in this case, we were able to sit down with the student and a school counselor and do the handoff now to our trained professionals and say, okay, how do we take it from what was a crisis that his people de-escalated, handing it off to people that the student cares about, right? And that we care about them. And then we move forward with it. And then how do we work through that day and making sure like teachers aren't like, right? Like, we're probably going to give a pass on homework today. They were at the house this weekend and here's what's going on. And so I think that is a prime example of how this role makes, how it hits home for me, right? Like if our goal is to be the trusted adult, and granted, don't get me wrong, I mean, I know I'm on a hot mic on a live TV here, but at the end of the day, the X's and O's and the learnings piece, it's all really important, but it's the social, it's the emotional, it's the relationships that we need to give our students. And he's literally a Jedi master at it. He has the ability to just make it happen. He makes us look really good on the backside, and having those meetings then with families and yep. Oh yeah. Officer Gabriel and his people were out at our house, and yet we feel really safe. And sometimes they don't want to talk to me on a Monday morning because it's already been addressed, but here we are. So. Yeah.
Excellent.
I think he just said it all.
When you think
I
about your
guess-
site at the high school, your
Yeah.
students there,
A lot of process the same. When Gabriel calls, doesn't matter what time you pick up and see what's going on with your kids. But if I had to pick anything, I think how he makes my job easier is I can sit down with him and know that we're two separate entities, but we work together. And I just go, what do you think? I just not gonna say that. And he'll tell me what he thinks. And I think Michael knows that. I think we take that.
Well, there's some genuine trust there with him that it didn't take years to develop. It was like, this guy came in, he's a social worker by, previous life. He's a social worker. So I think that's the lens in which he's looking through his decision-making, which is really what we want our decisions to be made through too, is like, what's in the best interest of the student. And
So, yeah. Told him many times, we're really lucky to have him. He's beyond his years. He'll be chief someday.
Thank you so much.
Can we just throw his picture up there one more time? Just want everybody to see this. this photo, this magical photo, that's, just wanna, we should leave it with that right there. Does that not look like a gentleman that loves his job?
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we will move on to item B. We have a report from Director of Finance, Val Murdersdorf, along with Director of Buildings and Grounds, Cole Nelson. They'll be presenting the proposed 2023-24 operating capital and long-term facilities maintenance budget. And the board will take action on this item at our next meeting. Thank you.
Good evening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the capital and long-term facility maintenance budget. Slightly less exciting than the last topic. I think we should make budgets the very first topic at all these upcoming meetings. So I do know how to clean out a room though. Operating capital and long-term facilities maintenance has about 4 different revenue streams. So operating capital is a levy and aid mix based on enrollment. Lease levy is a levy amount for specific leases. So we can lease for time at the Dundas Dome or the hockey arena and a variety of things that fit within that statute. Our capital levy is the voter approved capital levy. You'll see that this is still the same 750,000. The increase actually will come in fiscal 25. So not this budget I'm presenting, but the next budget. And then long-term facility maintenance, we are headed into year 7 already with this funding stream, which is a little hard to believe, but that's where we're at. And that really has provided about 3 times the funding that we were receiving prior to this program to really help fund repairs and maintenance of facilities. The capital budget, while presented by itself, is actually included in the general fund. We do this early each year as a reminder, just to be able to get out in front of any bids and projects to make sure that we are securing the best possible pricing. And because summer construction in school districts is a very cramped time frame, and there are limited people doing the work for all the schools. And so we want to make sure we're in front of that. It is also considered restricted. So there is a fund balance code for both operating capital and long-term facility maintenance revenue. So they have each have their own. So revenue that comes in can only be spent on the expenditures that are allowable in the statute. They each have their own statutes and allowable things and unallowable things. So we are constantly making sure that we are meeting those. And if we don't spend the revenue, it builds up. We can build it up intentionally. We've done that sometimes with the LTFM revenue to make sure we can pay for some of the bigger projects that we need to take care of. And then we have a unique capital committee here in our district that I think works really well. We take sort of all of the things that are on the top. So the lease levy comes out of the capital. There's a handful of other things that we choose to code there. And then whatever's remaining, we have our capital committee come together and we generate the list of all the needs across all of the buildings and basically work cooperatively to come to consensus on what makes the most sense and what we should prioritize for the next year. And so that has been in place the entire time I've been here and has worked really well to make sure that we're all working together and we can see the bigger picture of the district facilities rather than just what's in my building at this time that I want or need. So I intentionally put pictures in throughout just to give you a high level sense of what these dollars are doing for the district. So these are some pictures during construction and wrapping up construction of the high school main office remodel. And that was used with LTFM dollars. So this is a breakout of the different sources. So we have about 861,000 in operating capital, about 382 for lease levy, 750,000 for capital, And I think my LTFM budget just fell off the slide there, but the largest portion, the 40% is the LTFM. It's about 1.3 million. And so you can see kind of how all of those pieces play into that total. The capital levy in fiscal 25, we won't know for sure what the dollar amount is, but it'll be closer to 1.5 or 1.6 million. So this is what the revenue summary looks like. You have 2 years of audit history. So you can kind of see where things have been, what our current revised budget is that was approved in December, and then what I'm proposing for 23-24. So the operating capital you can see has been kind of slowly trickling down. And that is obviously a product of our enrollment. That is an enrollment-based formula. The capital projects levy is voter approved at 750,000. And so that has been very consistent. Lease levy can go up and down depending on the year and the leases. It is because it's levy, it's got the 3-year look back. So if we budget for the leases for the ice arena, for the Dundas Dome, for what we anticipate using, and then it can be more or less than that. So this particular year, because of the pandemic, we're seeing some of those reductions that are lowering that total amount of revenue, if that makes sense, because we didn't fully utilize what we thought we would during the pandemic. Long-term facility maintenance, also enrollment driven. So you can see that's declining. The largest part of the jump, though, I want to be very clear, is because we did do an additional bond using the LTFM revenue. And so that reduces it. And that was for the middle school roof that we replaced. And then the sale of equipment, you'll see that in 21-22 audit results, about 141,000. And then again, I have about 100,000 budgeted for this coming year. So we will have this every other year where we are either selling our MacBooks or we're selling our iPads because they're 4-year leases and they are offset each other just perfectly so that we do it every other year. This is a rough estimate. It varies on the condition of the devices and, you know, the current going rate for that, but that will be a process that we work through this summer once we have our new lease established, which you'll hear about in the coming months. So this was Bridgewater Science Room. We repurposed and kind of redid 2 smaller rooms in the Bridgewater Media Center and put in new flooring that's a little more science experiment friendly. But that was we did out of LTFM. So these are the projected expenditures. The leased facility and assessments will be about 417,000. If you are comparing slides, you'll notice that number does not match the lease levy revenue. That is not an error. We can only claim the lease portion and not any operational costs of the lease. And so there's between 10 and 20% of each lease that the general fund or the capital budget pays for. And so that's why that amount is slightly higher. The lease purchase agreement, that 212,000, is specific for the Spring Creek addition. There's probably 2 more years on that, and that will be completed. That is not something we chose to lease levy at the time. And so that's just something we pay for with the operating capital funds that we have. The building and program allocation is an amount where we give a per student allocation to each building. So they have some discretionary capital to meet smaller specific needs at their buildings. And then there's some for activities and music and those sorts of things. And so that is typically been fairly consistent each year. And then textbooks, digital curriculum is managed by our instructional services department. And that is depending on who's on the curriculum instructional review cycle and making sure we can update our curriculum in an appropriate way. Technology leases, I did budget for an increase, but I'm actually hopeful that we'll have a slight decrease in this. We are considering the model and the number of the iPads that we'll have to lease in this new lease. And so hopefully it'll be a little bit less, but to be conservative, I budgeted for an increase in that. And then network administration, as you know, is something we have done on and off to help support the general fund. Currently, we're not anticipating that for this year for a couple of reasons, but mostly because the budget or the fund balance is lower than anticipated from the 21-22 school year, which I'll show you in the next slide. And then the capital committee recommendations, this is the projects and things that we come to consensus on. As you can see, we're having a busy year this year with about $613,000 allocated, but only $184,000 for next year. So again, a combination of declining enrollment, less revenue, and some additional projects. And just the way that the fund balance is, we wanted to make sure we restored that back to the goal of 200,000. And then long-term facility maintenance, we are planning for just shy of about 1.3 million. That's been kind of our sweet spot. We bring in 1.3 million, so we try to stay there unless we are intentionally growing the fund balance to save for a bigger budget. So these are all the categories that we are required to report LTFM expenditures in. I won't read them all to you. You can see them. It varies from year to year, depending on the types of projects that we have coming up. And so interior surfaces and mechanical systems are kind of the big ones for next year. Interior surfaces is paint and carpet and all of those things that you would think of with interior surfaces. And mechanical systems is fairly broad, but if you think of things like the building controls, that's kind of the big one we have coming up. So this is some pictures of the ALC garage, which you can actually see right out in the parking lot here. And so that is going to be very helpful for their construction class. So for next year, capital, we had pretty limited resources this year, and so we had to really narrow it down. But our large mower is going to be replaced, a new server, a riding scrubber, a Chromebook replacement, nothing too crazy and fancy next year. And then LTFM, again, the building controls I've already commented on. We will be doing some interior door replacements at NCEC and the middle school. Flooring replacements, district-wide asphalt. There are some things that we typically do every year just to make sure we're keeping up with things. We are looking to have Wold come in and work with the ALC to look at their space comprehensively. They have wanted to do a few things here and there, and that is one area of the district that we have not touched in the last several years. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at their programming as it is today and as they would envision it, and making sure that we have spaces that suit that appropriately. And so that's a process that we will go through with them this coming year. And then we are also looking at a district-wide facilities assessment. We had that with the high school, so we have all of that detail, but making sure that we have it for all of the other buildings now that we are in a good place and have updated them, and making sure that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we have a very solid plan of how to stay on top of all of that. This was a truck that we bought last year, and I believe that's Jim Posh. Now retired Jim Posh in the truck for the picture. Is this the one that you drove out of state to get? Yeah, that's what I thought. Stewardship in action. So when you pull all of that together, this is what it looks like. So you can see for 21-22, we ended with about 256,000 in operating capital and just over $1 million for LTFM. For 22-23, we actually had anticipated spending down some of the operating capital budget. And so that's why you're seeing that 8,856. That is not my favorite number on this slide. It's way too low for my comfort level. So that will be, again, 21, 22 had some unexpected things happening. But we will rebound that in 23, 24, and I don't have concerns about that in the future, especially knowing in fiscal 25, we have the capital projects levy coming in to support that as well. LTFM, we're going to spend down a little bit, but then hopefully build that back up to about 847. We have a minimum goal of about 600,000 there. And again, those are intended to support something catastrophic. I don't even like saying it out loud because I don't want it to happen, but if a boiler, went out and we needed to do some kind of unanticipated replacement, we have some money set aside that can support that without hampering the general fund unexpectedly. This is the restriping of Bridgewater. I'm sure most of you know that the traffic was completely rerouted. And so it is opposite now. So having lines and arrows is super important. I was there probably about a month ago and still had somebody come drive in the wrong way, even though there's like a concrete block there. So striping is important. And this is the LTFM 10-year plan. I do think this is like a second agenda item, but I'm going to talk about it and then he can talk about the indoor air quality. So we are required as part of the LTFM plan, we are required to have a 10-year plan. The board is required to approve it, and we usually submit that in July, and that sets us up for the next year. Again, it's a budget, so we can tweak it, and it's pretty difficult, I think, to map out 10 years of expenditures. So we have, I would say, the first 4 years are pretty solid estimates of where we see big things coming up. Once you get out past probably 2026, it's all the like standard annual things, anything that we know is on a cycle. But there will, again, in 2028, it's very unlikely that we're going to spend $526,000. It'll likely be more than that, but we just don't know what that is yet. So if we do, great, we'll grow that fund balance, which is an okay thing to do as well, because the more we can pay for cash rather than borrowing saves our taxpayers. So that is the 10-year plan. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on that. It's just a requirement of receiving the money, but know that we have additional detail behind that to support to make sure we're on the right track. Do you want him to do the indoor air quality, or do you want to do questions about this specifically and then do that at the next?
Should do it.
Thank you for having me, board. So just the update on the IQ survey. So we sent out an indoor air quality survey. This year we sent it out beginning of December and got the responses at the end of January. So we partner with IEA, that is their health and safety consultant that we work with to manage all of our health and safety, from safety management plans to lockout tagout to lead and water testing and so on. So we collected 226 responses. This is sent to district-wide staff from 7 of the buildings. And it's really just to identify any potential areas of concerns that staff may have in their buildings, whether that's, water intrusion, they're asked about that, or if there's, stained ceiling tiles, or if there's certain smells that they're smelling. So, so that is sent out. So we're currently reviewing that. Good news is there's nothing that's catastrophic or anything, no mold growth that people are seeing or anything like that. So all things are good, but we review that with IEA. And then I have all of the head custodians go out and change, if there are ceiling tiles that are maybe were wet from a water leak we have had repaired since, we get that kind of stuff fixed. So that's the majority of that. So you can take questions on both.
Board members, any questions or comments for Val or for Cole? Okay, Ben.
Thanks, Cole. Super in the weeds question, but for the classrooms that are radiant heat, do those also have a passive air exchange in the same classroom, and what's the filtration level on those?
Yep. So on typical systems that I would say, I'm just thinking of all the schools, gonna say all have a exterior radiation like you're talking, and that's kind of supplemental heat to create a barrier on the exterior walls. So on interior classrooms, you don't typically see those radiation panels, and then everything else has overhead similar to in here on those. So at all the buildings, we're all of them are a little bit different. So like a Greenville had different design standards than, you know, when it was built compared to the other ones, but all of them I have a MERV 11 filters on them where we can. We actually worked with our supplier with those, and they do a bag filter, because when you create more filter, we're restricting more airflow, and some of the older systems aren't designed to do that. So then you cause other problems on the line. But they make what they call a bag filter. So you're increasing that surface area to keep that same amount of flow and not restrict it. So we've maximized that, you know, to best ability. So.
Excellent. Any other questions? Amy?
First, thanks to both of you, because I know a lot of work goes down, it goes into these reports, and you have to boil it down into something that we can read and understand. And I really appreciate time to do that. I have a question for each of you, and both of my questions are kind of in the woods too. So the first question is gonna be for Val. Is the facility shop paid for, or does it? Where does that money come from? Is it not?
It is in this budget, and so that is part of the lease levy total. So what we did with that, so no, it's not paid for. I think we did a 20-year. I'd have to double check that. I think we did a 20-year lease on that, but we effectively did a lease purchase. So we had somebody come in and fund it because it was about $606,000. And then we are paying like $32,000, I think, each year for the next 10 or 20 years out of the lease levy. But it is lease levy. So there it's not an offset other than the operational cost.
Great. Well, thank you for validating me, because I thought it should be in here,
Yes,
and
yes.
I didn't see quite where it would be. So
Yep, lease
we'll-
levy.
we're still paying that off.
Yes.
Then my question for Cole. First, Cole, big thank you for the coat books. Whoa.
Take the win.
And so I read through the air quality and I got to the end, and it talked about diffusers, and it reminded me of the kerfluffle that happened earlier in the year with diffusers. And then I was really wondering, are people still using diffusers, and aren't they putting essential oils in it? And are we really following our own policy by telling them they can't, or how does that work?
Yep, so the diffusers are, you know, they're out there, you know, for sure. And that's another piece that we're continually working through as far as some energy guidelines that better define some of the personal appliances and personal amenities, because they do come up in the indoor air quality as far as, you know, the Sensi's or essential oils or even air fresheners, plug-in walls, all that kind of stuff. So that is something that we're continuing to work on and further define for staff. So, and there's nothing in the indoor air quality in that safety management plan that really define, you know, is a yes that you can or no you can't. It's really comes down to personal comfort, but that's what we're looking to do, is further define you know, what a diffuser is or what air fresheners are.
Okay,
If that makes
so
sense.
yes, it does make sense. So it's not a sort of a air quality pollution sort of thing. It's more a personal. Some people might be allergic to this.
Yep.
issue.
Most things with indoor air quality are it's hard to define indoor air quality, right? It's interpretive. A lot of things come down around comfort, you know, being hot or cold or, you know, humid or not humid. And so, yeah, there's nothing in there that really defines that. So.
Thank you.
Super. Any other questions or comments? Corey?
Thanks for your reports tonight. I have a question concerning the asbestos line. Budget line, that is, not the line or anything. I guess I hadn't thought about asbestos removal still happening. Obviously, we have 3, maybe 4 older buildings where I'm sure this occurs. Looking through, I see, you know, we spent 90,000 2 years ago, but only 6,800 this year. Can you tell me about the scope of what that means from actual work and removal? And then given that we have 41,000 budgeted for next year, I'm guessing you've identified a space that needs to be addressed. You already said that there are no major concerns. I'm guessing there's not a safety concern about air quality or anything like that with what I assume is
Yep.
current asbestos that needs to be dealt with.
Yep. So we, the money that we do spend in that specific code is again with IEA. So we're required to do 6-month periodic inspections on any kind of asbestos that's in the building to ensure that, you know, nothing's changed or gotten damaged that it would be harmful for anyone. So we have to do that. So that's kind of the periodic stuff and the annual stuff that we do. And then, like you said, the other ones were, a big one was like the high school. So, you know, could be asbestos pipe wrapping up above the ceiling on some of the domestic water lines and stuff like that. So that were more of the project-based things. And we try to do those or align those when we're doing projects. So that one specifically with the ALC, just putting some dollars aside to remove the asbestos, because I always like to do that when it makes sense and where it's applicable when we're replacing stuff like that. So, yep, no major concerns. And again, we're required some pretty strict monitoring on that they come in and do for us. So.
Super. Okay, Ben.
Sorry, one more question, Cole. So just looking at the document in the packet here, it said that we were doing our lead and water and radon testing again in 2022. Did that get completed, and what were those kind of
Yep.
highline results?
Yep, so we did that. It was about a year ago, actually, that we did that. And so we're required to do that testing every 5 years. And it's and we're not required to do the radon testing. It's just recommended, but we do. And it's a very robust test. I can't remember how many tests they put out, but it's a number of 100, and they were taped all around and whatever. And so we did not have any concerns with radon, and all the tests or nothing was above the permissible level. We did have a couple sinks that were kind of marginal, so we had to do some retesting, and all those came back down afterward. And so there's nothing in the district that is above that, that's accessible to any students or staff. So.
Right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Jeff?
Yeah, thanks for your report. We had any major system failures in the HVAC? I mean, just like shut down for extended period of time?
We want to answer this, knock on wood. No, we have not. Yeah, no, we've been pretty fortunate with that. You know, we're very fortunate with Jim retiring to have, you know, some staff members that are very, very good at what they do. And so we can usually find a way to get things back up and running if we have a part failure or something like that. So.
Any other comments? You had-
I just have a couple here. Just want to make sure everybody understood what Val said related to the iPad lease. So we are right now working with Apple we have settled on the 9th generation iPad. There's a newer one, but there's some concerns about the new one has just a few features that we're not quite ready for yet in terms of things like state testing, as there's no headphone jack. And so we are focusing on the less expensive previous generation model. We use the state contract with Apple. And so we're working through that process right now. So you can anticipate to see the new lease coming before you. We wanted to make sure that you heard about it tonight. We are all hoping, we did put in for the iPad lease for the Universal Service Administration companies. That's the federal government's, they do the E-rate program, which we've been part of for several decades. In COVID, there was something called the Emergency Connectivity Fund. We use some of those funds for hotspots and things like that to support students with at-home learning with internet access. We have put in for that again, but we put in for over $1.5 million to have the ECF pay for this iPad lease. We were advised to begin with, good luck. You know, I mean, you probably won't qualify because there's so many other schools that might have a higher poverty index than you do. But we're hopeful because they asked us a few questions about a month ago. They followed up on our application and asked for a few clarifying points. So our representatives from Apple say that's unusual, that they actually follow up if they're not actually seriously considering the funding. We can't promise you, but this is an example of when there is a federal program, even if we don't think we have a great chance to get it, we do the best that we can to make the application and see where the chips fall. So in this case, hopefully, that would be a big win for the capital budget. But I just want board members to see, you know, we will most likely be bringing you a lease, and then of course, it'll be a two-step process. We do like to take, what we've learned is that we can get a better price from Apple if we do something in the spring, as opposed to waiting until all the way till the summer. And then our tech staff have learned that it's far better to actually switch the devices out with students still here, toward the end of the year, rather than waiting for a big handout kind of thing like the old days when we used to do that in the summer. So I just want to really make sure that everybody's clear. We always take a look at all the different devices that are available. We've said that we just really think the iPad is still the best with all the infrastructure that we've built over the last 12 years. We think it's really the best device for us at this time. And then I do just want to come back to the MERV 11 comment that Cole made, because he gave a high level piece, but we do have MERV 13 in at least 2 places in the district. Would you just talk about MERV 13 versus MERV 11?
Yep, so we do have MERV 13 that was related to Greenbelt Park. So that's on a new standard building where they're designing the systems and everything appropriate for that. That is what they would design to. So Greenbelt Park, we all MERV 13, and then Spring Creek where they did the addition, in the cafeteria there. They also did that unit. So again, there's a couple pieces out there that we do have. So
Thank you.
Good, thank you, Cole. I have a question for you on the HVAC. You're saying it's pretty good right now, and you have some people that can help meet any, what I would imagine, minor issues. How comfortable are you with that system? Like, can you put how many years you think you could keep it up?
are you talking for any specific building or for?
At the high school.
Oh, at the high school. Okay. So I think just to kind of circle back on the district-wide, the facilities assessment, that's a big piece as to why, most of you have seen that report when Wold completed that. And that's really why, we're pushing to do that, is to make sure that we have a very, very good pulse as to where everything is at, so that we can prioritize the projects where we need. And why we're, spending those dollars this year specifically to that for some potential energy savings with the building controls that we're updating, and then just making sure that we're running it. As regards to the high school, I don't have any imminent concerns. There's no, I think, as we've discussed before, there's no emergency at the high school that we need to act on now. There are pieces of equipment there that are at the end of their useful life. And so there are things that if they were to fail, we have to get quite creative to get, back running. There was an example of the boiler exhaust that we had to fix, and we had to CNC. And so some of it's failures, and some of it's the supply chain that we're, running into, and the issues that we have, or really the market has with getting some of the parts and replacement parts of that. So I don't have a perfect Fed crystal ball. I'd definitely tell, but I don't have any immediate emergency concerns right now.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. And I think that was item C as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Dr. Hellman show. Item D, you're going to provide a brief report regarding your site visit of Arcadia Charter School that happened February 2nd.
I noticed you emphasized brief. Yes. So yes, we're embedding into the board agenda every time that we do a charter school site visit. I'm going to include the report that I provide to their board, just so we also have that as part of our record from when we recertify as an authorizer 4 or 5 years down the line from now. So I was at Arcadia on February 2nd. In the packet, you see that we have 4 big questions that we evaluate charter schools around. Number 1 is the educational program of success. Is the organization efficient and well run? Is the school meeting its legal obligations? And our strategies in place for sustaining success and continuing to improve over the next charter term. You'll see the schedule that they gave me for the day next in that item. And then you'll see my brief reflections based on my site visit and some other data around each of those big 4 questions. So in summary, Arcadia is a joyful place to go. It is truly a very inclusive school. As I've told many people, I was thrown off a little bit because they moved this painting, but they had a painting of Yoda from Star Wars saying, accepting are we? And that is one of the most true statements about Arcadia. It's a very different environment. It's a project-based environment. There are some classrooms, but it's more of an open environment, and they really are doing a good job. I have no concerns at this point. I am a little concerned just about their continued capacity. So you've seen in the report, I don't think that they need additional administrative assistance on site, but they could look into purchasing some virtual administrative assistant hours to really just take some of the pressure off the sole administrator of the building in terms of just some of the routine kinds of administrative tasks that need to be done. Overall, the students are very engaged. The student panels are excellent. The parents really love the school, and they are being successful within the frame of how they are looking to define success. They also understand there are some things that they could do to improve, but they lean into those kinds of things. So it was quite a good site visit. We have Prairie Creek. We had to reschedule Prairie Creek due to weather. They're coming up probably in another few weeks, month, something like that. So I'll bring that report back to you at this time.
Super. Board members, do you have any comments or questions? Amy?
Just a quick comment. I was very impressed that you spent a whole day there because I know how full your schedule is. And I do think that shows how much we value Arcadia, and I'm sure you're going to do the same thing at Prairie Creek. So thank you for really taking the time to check them out and make sure they're on the right track.
We've been doing full site visits, full day site visits for a long time. And in years where the contract is up, often there's more than one. The second and third might not be full day visits, but they're more targeted if their contract is up for renewal. But it's important for us to be there. We are, again, one of only two traditional school districts in the state that still authorize charter schools. They do a very good job, and it's fun for us to go see. We learn a lot from them about strategies that we might be able to utilize in the district.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Corey?
Quick follow-up on the piece about additional administrative help being done digitally. As the authorizer, is that just a friendly suggestion from you, or is there any commitment to that Laura would have to follow up on, or is it you're just saying this would be very helpful for you?
Yeah, so remember, the charter school is its own completely autonomous entity. So they have their own board, they have their own, as the authorizer, there would be very rare circumstances where I would step in and say, you need to do this. Mostly that would be around, are you meeting your legal obligations, right? So think of us as an auditor in that way. So my comment was more feedback for the school, just of how can they help make sure that they are able to support their administrator, who's doing a lot of great work, but a lot of heavy lifting as well.
Good. Anyone else? Nope. Okay, thank you. Now we move on to the policy committee recommendations. And you'll be speaking about policy 644, 721, 807, and 808.
Yes, so we have 4 policies this evening for the first reading. I'm going to talk 644 first is about guest speakers. This is not an MSBA model policy, but this is a policy that the district has had in place since 2008. And it's really just to govern what the processes are for having guest speakers in the school. We did some modest changing of the policy, nothing what I would say substantial. We also did some clarification, just around the fact that the district may host candidate forums, and it just talks about that we can host those. They should not be, they should be speaking in a nonpartisan capacity, but we don't lean away or shy away from having those kinds of events. And the guest speakers policy is really just to try to help provide the framework for people to be able to decide what's an appropriate guest speaker, making sure that it aligns with our strategic plan, making sure that it enhances content, et cetera. And so really just making sure we have that frame so that when people do want to have a guest speaker, that they have a frame for that. So I would say this was more a reorganization of that policy than anything substantial. The next policy that we're taking a look at is grant writing. And again, I would say this is in a very similar frame, minimal changes here, but enough to where we felt that we needed to bring it back to you. Really talking about that all grant funding sources for programs or activities must align with the vision and strategic commitments of the district. And the purpose for that is that we want to make sure that we're using all of our resources toward what you have adopted as the district strategic direction. So when we are all working toward the same goal and we're looking for those additional funds to support that work, we are able to have an appropriately narrow focus. I don't want to have a narrow focus, but we want to be able to have a focus that we are able to sustain and to be able to really get value out of grants of things that are going to move our district forward based on the strategic commitments, the benchmarks, and the vision. So some pretty modest updates. You'll just see that, to facilitate, we're looking at student achievement in academic or non-academic areas, things that can improve the student's experience. And then you will also just see some change to how if a department or a school goes over the grant amount, just governing how that is handled. And then we also reference the district's fiscal compliance and procedures module. Remember, with policy, we're doing the big picture items, and then the procedures are how the administrators implement those. And with a lot of policies that reference finance, we're going to Val's fiscal compliance and procedures manual that's updated annually. 807, health and safety. Again, what you'll see is this is some what I would call reorganization of the policy. Nothing that I see as major or substantial. I do want to point out in under Roman numeral 4 programs and plans. You're seeing that we're adding these plans are maintained with the health and safety files in the buildings and grounds office and are listed on the district website. We have stricken at the recommendation of IEA all of these the various 35 different pieces that were the plans that were included as part of the policy. And the reason that we're doing that is so that it can be put into procedure so that those plans can be modified and adjusted as needed by our administrative team, as opposed to having it where there are from times where a piece that might be on that list may no longer be something that we need to conduct. And so making sure that it's more of a living document. So that's I think the major change in that particular one. And then if we take a look at the next policy, 808, this is around key control access. Again, fairly minimal changes, but the one that I do want to point out is that you're seeing us putting in some real substance and clarity around badges and keys, and being explicit that employees will not surrender their badge. In our district, our badges also are keys because they can open a number of different doors that are governed by a badge access card. So this is just saying, no, you're not going to give your badge to someone else who might just need to run into the building for something or something along those lines. As a staff member, badge is your key. You're not to surrender to people who do not work for the school. We don't have a ton of this, but from time to time we do, and we want to be super clear because this is an issue on a variety of different levels, making sure that we have controlled access. And then finally, also just making sure that people understand they're not surrendering their metal keys to any party or leave their metal keys in a compromised location. So all staff members have a badge. And then all staff members, or most staff members, actually not all, have some kind of metal key, either to open a classroom door if there's a person who might have a master key for a building, etc. So this is really just to be super clear about the expectations that the keys are for your use as an employee only, not for others. Again, we haven't had a ton of issues with it, but it is the kind of issue that if we have it, it is major and it's pretty quick. So this is just the update. We wish we did not have to make that clarity, but we just feel that it's responsible for us to do so. So those are the 4 first read policies.
Okay, thank you. Board members, do you have any questions or comments on any of the policies? Okay, Amy.
So I have a question on 3 of the policies.
Go ahead.
All right, so starting with 721, and looking at the last sentence under purpose, saying all grant funding sources for programs or activities must align with the vision and strategic commitments of the district. I think I get what you're going for, but like, let's say a large company like Pepsi decided to give us a grant to do something, but so as a funding source, Pepsi as a company does not align with the vision of our strategic commitments. So I'm just wondering if that could be worded a little better or a little differently.
So I think the important part of this, I see what you're saying. I think the policy name is the controlling factor, grant writing. So this is when the district is making an application for the grant. So the policy isn't necessarily arguing Pepsi. It is saying that we can have people who apply for a grant from Pepsi, but the alignment of what they're asking for needs to align with the strategic commitments and vision. So I think that the name of the policy is critical here. This isn't a donation. I think that that's different, right? This is where one of our people are explicitly writing for a grant that is being provided by a particular company. So it's about our people when they make the application that they need to be in alignment with what the strategic vision.
I understand that, but that isn't quite how it reads. Or for me, the word sources is confusing. It talks about funding sources. And so then it would be the company. And you might just want to say all grant funding for programs.
Or application.
Oh, yeah, that's mine.
That's
I-
fair. We looked at grant writing as being the driving factor there, but that's a very simple fix. So
I didn't mean to make it complicated, but I could see how that would confuse someone later on.
all grant applications. Yep.
So the next question I have is for 807, and it's just, we mentioned a safety committee, but we don't say anything about how often they should meet or whether they even have to meet. And I'm wondering if that's something we should stipulate in the policy or whether we should just let Cole decide everything.
So that's a good, because that the safety committee meets monthly, right? Or four times a year, 4 times a year. Yeah, I don't see any reason why we couldn't put the frequency. I think we could add something that the safety committee will meet at least quarterly or as needed.
Okay.
That's an easy
Yeah,
fix.
it
Yep.
just seemed like it needed a little something more about the committee in there for me. And then my last question is on policy 808. And I'm just wondering if there's any difference between someone, let's say there are 2 teachers out in the football field and one of them's coaching or whatever, and the other one forgot their key and they need to run back in, but it's the coach that has the key and he can't leave the students. So he gives his badge to the other teacher and lets them run in and get whatever they want. And technically it's against the policy. And I don't know whether we care or not, but it's just something to think about. I'm sure that's probably a common way that this policy might be broken, and whether we need to be more lenient in it or whether we'll just overlook that sort of thing if it happens.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through if I do think that people will forget their metal key more often than they'll forget their badge, right? Or if people do forget their badge from time to time, but they can't get in the building then. So they would typically have to go through, if it's during school days, they can certainly go through the regular main entrance. I appreciate the point. We'll have to go back and consider that. And the reason that I say it is that we want people to have that responsibility for their badge and their key. And so one of the components is that different employees may have different access levels with their badging or different access level with their keys, and there's a purpose for that. So I think that's where the rationale for we did not discuss, as we talked about the change, we did not discuss that circumstance, right? We were talking more about giving it to, people who are not school district employees, but we can certainly go back and discuss that if there needs to be another piece around, but we do want that self-responsibility of people who are using their own keys and their own badges and being responsible for that. And if you forgot it, you go home and get it. I have to tell you, once in a while, if I don't follow the exact procedure I have every morning, Matt Hillman's badge gets left at home and I'm going home to get it right before I'm coming back. Now, I'm fortunate I live in town. I'm able to do that. I'm not driving from a longer distance where that's an issue, but there are processes if you've forgotten your badge and or a key where people can get something for that day to be able to get through the day and be able to come back. So we can certainly talk about if there needs, our focus is you need to use the badge and or key that you were issued, not someone else's.
And I was thinking that maybe they left their badge or key in the building and they needed to run back in
Sure
and get
enough.
it.
Yeah, there are a variety of different scenarios for sure.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I wanted to know on 808, if the badges, if there's a log or a tracking system to know who entered and when, okay. And then
Yep.
I like Amy's comments, and I think that maybe there's a little more to think that I was thinking sometimes when we change a process, people want to resist that, but then in time they get used to it. So I imagine when you went to badges, people were upset that they needed to go get a badge and that kind of thing. But in time they figured out how to carry it on their person and got in. But in that line of thinking, I'm wondering if we need to state something in the policy about one of the other policies that talked about where the person is responsible if they overspend the grant. If something were to happen with your borrowed key, I don't know if we need this kind of language.
We do, and I'm trying to remember, we have that language. Cole, do you remember where it's at? Is it in the procedure?
Okay.
Yep, so where there's a monetary piece. You have to pay for your own replacement badge. I think you might get one for,
Sure, but like if
one for
something
free.
happened, then you would be responsible for that.
That's a good, so in terms of you're thinking about not just if you've lost the key, because
Right,
if you lose the key, you gotta pay for it.
Borrow
Yeah.
it and then stuff goes missing.
And yes, I would, yes, if a person, let's say that this language goes forward, right? And a person did give their badge to someone else and there was some kind of damage to the building or things like that. The person who gave their badge would most likely be disciplined using our progressive disciplinary process, of course, depending on the level.
Right, right.
But you're right. So the financial component, that's like if there's any damage, is someone responsible for that financial damage?
And I
That's
don't- yeah,
a
I
good
don't- I don't know
question.
if we want
Yep.
to have that, but something to think about just as people get used to, and maybe it serves as a way of helping people understand, I don't feel comfortable lending you my key.
Yeah, I think Val, do you remember if you lose a key, do you remember the amount, how much it?
It's $50. And I believe if you lose a master, it's $250.
That's
I-
why I have an air tag on my master key, because I'm not losing that thing. I'm not
I
paying. that.
declined a master key.
Yes.
Right, okay, any other questions or comments? Oh, Jeff.
Obvious question is, I mean, have you, with the policy and the systems that you have in place, I mean, have you had any, what you'd consider major breaches in the past, in your tenure here?
Yes.
Yes, Ben.
Just one quick question on the grant piece. Maybe this is a question for Val, but do we have a standard indirect rate that we charge for grants for overhead?
We actually do not. We don't do the indirect just because I want to make sure that they can utilize all of the funds for the program. And so that's something we've just taken on in-house in my department.
Good question. Anyone else? Okay, good, thank you. All right, now we have your update on the Indigenous Parent Advisory Committee.
Yes, so the Indigenous Parent Advisory Committee, under state law, is called the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. We are required, because we have a certain number of students who are qualify as American Indian students in our student information database. We're required to hold that meeting on an annual basis. We have modified that process to have this year, for the first time, we have had 3 meetings with that group. Again, what we're doing is we're asking our families, how is it going for them? Are there additional supports or those kinds of things that we can provide for them? Because we qualify, because we have enough students, we also qualify for a small amount of what's called the American Indian Program Aid. So it's about $20,000. We do work with that committee to determine how do we spend that. So the plan that we're currently working on with the state for this year would include a 6th grade field trip to a cultural center on the Mdewakanton Sioux campus in Shakopee. It would include continuing to fund books in our media centers that are authored by Indigenous authors and or have lead characters of Indigenous heritage. And then we are also looking at some specific programming for Indigenous students and tutoring. We know that that's a successful piece, and so we're looking at that. That's part of what we have come forward. And so then you're also required to have the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee to take a resolution of concurrence or non-concurrence. And the resolution of concurrence means that the families at that meeting feel that the school district is doing what it is able to support their students. And so we were issued a resolution of concurrence at that meeting, our last meeting on February 7th. I'm very pleased with moving to the 3 meetings this year. Typically in the past, when we would just use the 1 meeting that was required of us, we very rarely got more than one person to attend. And so this year, by using the multiple meeting strategy, we had 2 of the 3 meetings where we had multiple families attend. And so I think that we've learned quite a bit about the Indigenous families in our school and how we can best support them. So again, this is something that different than our other parent affinity groups. This is something that is governed by the state. And so we're following those processes. And I think we really learned a lot this year about how we can best support our Indigenous families. More to come. We look forward to more growth and dialogue with our families about how we can support them in the best way possible. So we did get a resolution of concurrence, and we will submit that to the state. We're not required to have you approve it. We're just required to report it to you, which we're doing tonight.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments? So this was the last meeting here in February for
Last-
the school year?
Correct. The last of 3 meetings for this school year. Yes.
Was that calendar set by state or was that?
Nope,
the-
we set it locally. So we had our first meeting in October,
Mhm.
second meeting in December. In our other parent affinity groups, we tend to have those meetings toward the end of the year. There is a March 1st deadline for us to have the resolution of concurrence. So we did move up
That's a
this to
state.
the February. So we have talked about the possibility of having an additional meeting at some point later this year, just to set the table for next year. But right now, we've completed the 3 meetings that we said we would do.
Mhm. This is, and you said the state requires a report by March 1st.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
They have been, in the past, they've been gracious and allowed us to submit it after the date because our board meeting in March would be after that date. So we were able to move it up so we could meet the timeline this year.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, and now we have your superintendent operations and strategic plan update.
So we have 4 items in the update today. One, we were very excited to share with you the K-8 winter benchmarks. And Tim, I'm going to plug in here just to show. So we are obviously, one of our strategic commitments is obviously to learner outcomes. And I think we all have heard about the concerns about academic performance of students coming out of the years that were the most significantly impacted by the pandemic. In the report, I linked to this. This was a No Northfield that Hope Langston provided. So again, I'm just going to hit I'm going to hit one key slide. We're talking K-8 progress here. And I'm going to go to this slide, which is 3rd through 8th grade state MCA predictor for meeting or exceeds. So in the fall, when those students take those benchmark tests right around the beginning of the year, that's in the maroon. And in yellow, the yellow color, you're seeing the winter predictor that happened in early January. So what we're very pleased to see is across all groups, we saw an increase from the fall to the winter, which you would expect. But we are really pleased to see, especially in the grade levels where we are using, where more people have been trained in the letters program, the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. We're seeing some substantial growth from fall to winter. And so what's very hopeful about that is that as these teachers continue to learn the science of reading, the components that are important to that, we are seeing dramatic growth of students, which we think is really, really positive. We anticipate more growth. We would love to have, our goal is to have every student reading at grade level by the end of grade 3 and grade 6. We know that if we can hit that 80% mark, that our multi-tiered systems of supports or the other programs that we had, not every student is going to always read. They don't all do it in exactly the same time or the same way. But if we can continue on that pathway to having more than 80% of students hitting that benchmark by the end of 3rd grade, we do have the other systems in place where we're very confident that we can get those students who do not have a specific disability that would prevent them from learning to read, to be able to read, so that we always say grades pre-K through 3 are reading or learning to read, and a 4th grade and above is reading to learn. So we are very pleased to see these increases from the fall to the winter. And especially you're seeing, 20% growth in our younger grades. And so again, that is shrinking when you get to the middle school grades, but they also started a little bit further ahead as well. So we are pleased to see these results for the winter. And then in mathematics, I think you see even more dramatic growth at the lower levels. And I think this shows that our youngest students are resilient, right? They are bouncing back fairly quickly. And so we're very pleased to see those results. Now, this is mid-year, right? This is a predictor. So we actually want to see what they do on the actual state assessment. But this gives us hope that the strategies that we're using are working. In mathematics, we're also doing some targeted piloting of a new mathematics curriculum called Bridges. And what's outstanding about that is the teachers who are using it are reporting, while it's somewhat time intensive up front, they said that what they are seeing in terms of the response from students and the growth in their being mathematicians is pretty substantial. So I wanted to share these winter benchmarks with you because I thought they were really powerful. And I think I'll just keep the report up. Then as we look at the semester PLC gallery walk, so one of the things that we've been talking about for years is making sure we have the ability to cross-pollinate what is successful from one professional learning community to another. And so just thanks to Hope Langston, the administrative team, and the folks who set up this PLC gallery walk. So at each building, their professional learning communities, there are 79 of them across the entire district. Think of it as a science fair, right? So they all had some kind of visual aid. There were some required components to it for them to share what was their SMART goal, what are the strategies that they have developed and are implementing, what is the results that they have had so far this year. And then each person was required to provide feedback to at least 5 different PLC presentations. So if you think about it, that was in the high school media center for the high school. That's the one that I attended. There were, I think 30 some around the perimeter of the media center. There was a sheet that people signed in to say, yep, I gave feedback here. There was a Google form that you could provide feedback to that PLC. Over 1,500 individual feedback forms were submitted, and they will be shared with PLC teams. If you think about our administrative team trying to provide that level of detailed feedback to 79 PLC teams, we are lean. That's going to be tough, right? But when we're crowdsourcing it like this, and your own peers are also giving you feedback, one of the things that we heard at the end of that day is the ideas that other PLCs got from their colleagues about strategies that might be in a different subject area, but wow, I hadn't thought of it in that way before. I'm going to try that, in my PLC. And so it's part show and tell. It's part a little bit of good old fashioned public accountability, right? That I'm going to present my results to my colleagues. And so we really are pleased with the reboot of PLCs this year. We think that we are really back to that original part about good old fashioned, making sure that we're spreading great instructional ideas through SMART goals and appropriate training, and making sure that people are using that time again to further their school improvement plan goals. So we were very excited about that. We think that it was a really good way to give feedback. We've had our Northfield Forward team try to provide feedback to all of these PLC groups in the past. That's a heavy lift, right? So they just got so much more feedback in this way. There's a lot of heavy lifting up front to get this ready, to get all of the feedback forms and all of the different artifacts ready to present. But we have just gotten universal, really quality feedback on that. And just so you know, we're actually making sure that everybody gave feedback. So we're looking to make sure that the folks who didn't give feedback, there's a lot of logical explanations. It's less than 10% of people, and a lot of dentist appointment that day, or we're sick or things like that. So there's even accountability to make sure did everybody do their work to provide feedback to their colleagues as well. Second page, Crisis Go app and Homeland Security Emergency Procedure Analysis. We just want to let you know that we are working to implement the Crisis Go app to improve communication during emergencies. So what that app does is it allows immediate digital access to the district's crisis plans. It allows for immediate mass communication in a situation where we are needing to do so. These are true emergency situations. Think of it as an emergency broadcast system style. It can actually use the same approach as the Amber Alert level of notification. It allows us to centralize offsite attendance when evacuation is needed. And so that's important. If you imagine if we were in a circumstance where we have the unthinkable kind of thing happening, the ability for the reunification center for people to be able to take attendance on their phones when they've reached the reunification center, and then the central folks who are working with parents to pick up their students, we have it right there live. It's not recorded on paper. It's not recorded in it's a specific system just for this. And so if we were in that situation, even with the best planning, it will be a little bit chaotic. And this will remove some of that variable to be able to make sure that we have the ability to know where students are at. Have they checked in? Have they not? And try to be able to provide a little bit of support for families in a situation that's going to obviously be very high stress. And then finally, I want people to know that we are scheduled, or Cole Nelson is scheduled to meet with a representative from National Homeland Security actually this Wednesday. They are coming to review our emergency and crisis plans. Both of these came out of my attendance of a school security symposium in December. This was a joint presentation that was sponsored by the Minnesota School Boards Association, my professional organization, MASA, the elementary and the secondary principals associations were also part of it, as well as statewide law enforcement. And it was a full day of doing talking security and school security. The good news for board members is that we were very affirmed that day. A lot of things that we are doing and we're doing well are things that were tips to provide relationship building, prevention, all of the kinds of things that we have worked very hard on. We felt affirmed that these two areas were things that I came back saying, we have some gaps in this. One of which was, we do have a number of systems to communicate, but I frankly was worried about a phone call or a text message coming from the same outfit that tells you that school is closed because of weather or because your lunch balance is low, right? So having this item that is only used in these true emergency situations, we look at as an insurance policy, and the fact that we can update all of these things. The system will update every night in terms of if there are new students to the district, our Skyward system will talk to this. It becomes real time overnight at least. So we think that that's very helpful. And then I had learned, I did not know that Homeland Security did provide review of school emergency plans until that day. And Austin Public Schools had shared that they had them come out and that the feedback was outstanding. They won't give you specific recommendations, but they will give you feedback that you can potentially implement. And so those are the two things that we saw as gaps from that last school security symposium. We immediately implemented them. I will tell you that in both cases, the last speaker of the day was a mother who lost a child at Sandy Hook, excuse me. And that was a very powerful, she talked about how she had to wait a full day before she knew, where that her child, they didn't know where that child was. And she just talked about the stress. And so this Crisis Go app, that piece that we can tell people immediately, yep, your child is with this teacher, this is where they are. And we think it's going to really provide peace of mind. It's something we hope we never have to use, right? But we would much rather have these things in place and never use them than not have them in place and wish that we had. So not the most uplifting part of the presentation, but that's the way it is. And I've got Cole still here. If there's any questions, Cole has taken the lead on implementing the Crisis Go app, and he's the lead on the Homeland Security visit. And then the final part tonight is just about the district priority-based budgeting timeline for 2023. So this is not a shock to you. Val shared with you the financial forecast at the last meeting. We've been talking about this for a long time, about how even though we made a number of reductions, a significant number of reductions over 2 years, the declining enrollment is a serious problem. And in the packet here, I'm giving you some keywords to talk about that. Just to give the example, I've shared this before, that this year we have 245 fewer students than we did in 2018-19. And that is resulting in approximately 2.45 million less in revenue this year. That's substantial, right? And so we even 245 students over 4 years, that doesn't necessarily all come in the same exact location. So it doesn't allow you to reduce things. Oh, there you go. We can reduce that. That's not the way it works when you're talking about 3,800 students. We've talked numerous times about inflation. I recently did a calculation that I shared with Southeast Minnesota legislators on Friday. I wish I had done this calculation before. But if the legislature had simply kept up with inflation over the last 30 years, this district would have $6.7 million more in revenue this year. So if you had just kept up with inflation, that's the compounding nature. That doesn't mean we would have gotten $6.7 million every year. Last year would have been a little bit less, right? Before the new inflationary factor had kicked in. We are working hard to get the legislature to tie the formula to inflation, but just think about the different discussion we'd be having. If they had kept up with inflation, we'd have $6.7 million more in revenue to be able to work with this year. That's an important piece. On the inflationary pressure, we've talked about that. I won't continue to go into that in terms of the replacement cost that our insurance premium, that one example, but you can talk to anybody across the system. Inflation is really impacting costs in nearly every sector of the district. And we've known about that for years. It's just becoming even more pronounced in some of the areas that it hasn't been. Special education cross subsidy. Again, this is the fact that the federal government has not kept its promise. We're nearing 50 years after IDEA was passed, and they still have not kept their promise of reimbursing 40% of the costs. Minnesota, of course, has raised the stakes in that we have higher levels of requirements than the federal government does. And so the state is still not, helping out, and so helping out as much as they should. So the special education cross up, it's a stark example of how underfunded state and federal mandates really force budget reductions at the local level, and every school district is in the struggle with the special education cross subsidy. And we've been sounding that alarm for years. So when we talk about why you just made $4.5 million in budget reductions last year, why are you looking at another 2.5 this year? These are the reasons why. As you know, we have been lauded many times for our financial management. We have one of the best finance directors in the state. We have a AA+ bond rating. This is what good financial management looks like. We could make everybody happy and, do some one-time expenditure things to buy down some reductions for next year, but you'd be right back here next year because you cannot outrun declining enrollment. You have to continue to try to address it until you get to a point where your enrollment stabilizes. I wish I could tell you that it's going to stabilize in 4 years. I don't have that, right? But what history tells us is that it will stabilize at some point. Our current projections don't show it stabilizing for the next 3 years, but if we can continue to do these pieces, we can come to a point where our new normal is more stable. And that's our goal, to be able to get to that point while maintaining as much programming as we can. I've included in the packet a few questions that I think reasonable people would have, right? For example, the capital projects levy passing in November. Not everyone may remember that, of course, capital projects are about the operating capital budget that Val talked with you about tonight. There will be a portion in 24-25 where we are able to pay for all of our technicians' salaries from that additional revenue. But as you saw, that's not until 24-25. So we're not able to use that right now in the next 2 years to be able to do that. So remember that capital projects levy was for things to support the ongoing maintenance of our facilities and for making sure that we're providing curriculum and other materials for our teachers to be able to best teach our students. And then we are also able to provide that opportunity for some general fund relief, but it's just not for a couple of years out. And then I understand that people, if they are reading updates about the legislature, or they're watching Almanac or Almanac at the Capitol, or all of the things that you watch if you're paying attention to the state legislature, people will know there are several bills that have been proposed that would provide schools with additional funds. Because the state funds us based on enrollment, all of those things are lessened for us. If we have less students, we're not going to realize the full capacity of what those proposals will be should they come to law. And I think anyone who has watched the legislature, regardless of the circumstance over the last 30 years, none of us are going to bank on 1 cent until the ink is dry on the bill. And so we wish that we would have had swift action at the legislature. We have not. Understandable, they're waiting for the February forecast, but we cannot manage the district's finances based on hoping that the legislature comes through. Now, do I think there's some really good momentum? Yes, I do think there is that, but we can't count on that until everything is done. And so when people say, well, I hear the legislature is going to give you, that's a proposal. If you support that proposal, you'd like, join our legislative action committee and we'll help you learn how to advocate so that your voice is heard at the Capitol. So we're just sharing that yes, there's a number of bills that are proposed, over 1,500 total so far in a normal legislative session. By this time, there's usually about 500 because we've had several years where some of these bills have been backed up. So we just can't bank on that. And we just really want people to understand that we have to act responsibly. And this is what acting responsibly looks like. So I've also included a timeline. Last year, we had over 70 people who participated. I think it might have probably was even more than that through people who gave email and other feedback. we know that we did a very robust process last year to seek feedback for a 2-year plan. As I've shared with you before, we do not, we believe we can use the priorities that they shared with us last year and be able to implement or propose, a reduction plan based upon that. So you can see the timeline. We are planning to bring a list of proposals that the administrative team is making based upon the priorities that the teams put together last year. That will be at the February 27th board meeting. We will release that, of course, as part of the packet on February 23rd. So people have plenty of time to be able to see what's the proposals, et cetera. And then you'll see over the next several months, we have a typical process. We will include what I'm calling 2 public hearings. Those public hearings would be very similar to the large scale event that we had at the middle school last year, where Val and I provide a presentation about the financial situation. People have an opportunity to go into classrooms with an administrator, and we'd like to have board members there as well, so that we can hear the real impact of the proposed reductions. And then we'd come back for kind of an open mic kind of piece in terms of the public comment rules, so that people that you have a chance to hear where people are weighing in on this before you have to make final decisions. And of course, we make a proposal and we provide that proposal, and then you make those decisions. And you know that we have a very solid process that we used last year about how to present those 2. So you can essentially have a line item veto if you want to use that analysis, that you can say, yep, we agree with all of these proposals, but maybe this one we'd like to see a little bit different. So the board ultimately has the authority on all of those things. We're going to do everything we can to bring you well-reasoned and as logical as we can proposals. This will not be easy. This will be difficult, because every program that we have is valuable to someone. There is nothing that we offer that people say, that doesn't matter. Every single program that we offer means something to someone and to their family. And so we aren't going to tell you, we're not going to try to make this look like it's going to be roses. It's going to be difficult because we've already made difficult decisions. Now we're having to make another round of difficult decisions. But we have to do that because we have to also take care of the kids for the future as well, right? So we have to make sure that we're providing programming, not just for today, but for the kids down the line as well. And so that's part of our job, to be able to make those proposals to you. You can see the rest of the timeline there in terms of looking at when we'd ask you to authorize the budget reduction package, when the general fund budget presentation would be, and then finally approving the general fund budget on May 22nd. So that is the report this evening. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, board members, questions or comments? Amy?
I have 2 questions, but first I want to say great work on the benchmarks and on the gallery walk. That's all very exciting. My first question is, how are school board members part of the Crisis Go system? How do we interact or get information from it?
Well, I think that how we would need to do that would be to put you in the system as a staff member. If you're a parent, you're already in the system, right? Because you're already as part of it. But if you no longer have a student in the district, we would have to add you as essentially a staff member, I think, Cole. So if that's something that people have an interest in, we certainly can make that happen.
And it would go on your district, district laptops, it will be pushed out to every district laptop or device, so it'd be on iPads and a district laptop as well.
And then you could also choose to download the app to your phone as well.
Great. I think for speaking for myself, I would like to be involved whatever way makes sense. And then my second question is, do you know what time the hearings are going to be for the budget hearings?
We have not yet set those times. I think we would typically go with our normal start time of 6 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Any other questions or comments?
6 to 8.
6 to 8.
Anita's got it because we already requested the space.
Okay, Robert?
Well, just a comment on the winter academic benchmarks, which are fantastic. As someone who has elementary age children in our buildings, I can't count the number of times that our teacher, I've heard staff members talking about letters training. And we know that, there's so many trainings offered, then many may just go in one ear and out the other, and this is not what we're seeing there. Our teachers are excited and are implementing this, and I think we're really seeing that, at least with our reading results.
The around 60 educators who have been involved or are involved. When you talk to other districts, and you consider our size, we are well ahead of the game on this comparatively from the anecdotal discussions that we've had. And then we just did also, Alicia Clary, who is one of our instructional coaches. She recently completed where we believe in a train the trainer model. So she is now a local trainer. And so she is doing her first cohort of 10 teachers that she is leading them through the training. So this in the long term is going to save us quite a bit of money. And if you would like a treat, Alicia is the treat, not me, but we appeared on KYMN last Tuesday morning to talk about letters in the science of reading. So that podcast is available on the KYMN radio station website.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, I'm really impressed with the PLCs.
Great.
It's a great way for everybody to hear from each other. And I know there's discussion sometimes about I forgot the term now, talking across grades. And I wanted to hear how long the displays were up and if you had 100% participation when you say 79 PLCs.
Yes. So to my knowledge, every PLC provided a visual artifact. That might have been a science fair style poster. It also could have been a computer presentation. I think the winners of the most creative were our technology and engineering department at the high school, who used one of their new pieces of equipment to etch onto a piece of plywood their report. I don't know how big that piece of plywood was, but it was pretty, and they assured me that they could sand it off so they could use it again. They were very clear about their commitment to stewardship. So yes, all 79 PLCs participated. And then in terms of then the reverse of it, the initial data shows more than 90% of licensed staff members provided some kind of feedback to other PLCs. And as we're just going through, just to make sure everybody participated, we know there were some people who were gone for the day. We're also just following up to make sure that people didn't use a different methodology of providing feedback. So yes, we know that 79 of 79 participated is what my understanding is. And then the flip side is, did they get the feedback? And we're confident 1,500 pieces of feedback is pretty good.
Yeah. And how long were the displays up?
So the displays were typically put up the night before, and then depending on the school and the space that they chose, they would have been up through the end of that PLC morning. So we did take a picture of every single one of them. So if there were people who were photo photographers at each site, and they took up, if it was a science fair style visual, they would take a photo of that. If it was something that was on a computer, we asked for the screenshots to be shared with instructional services. So my understanding is we have a record of, if not all of them, almost all of them.
And also thank you again for the talking points here at the end of the update. And I hope that board members will keep this handy somehow. And as people ask you about, all things legislative action, that you'll be able to refer back to this and keep using the same messaging. So we will, we'll endeavor to keep growing that legislative action committee. All right. Okay, so we are on to the consent agenda. As a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration? Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Moved by Amy, second. Jenny. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item 7 is we have one item for individual action. I will take a motion first, then we will discuss and finally take a vote. Is there a motion to authorize the administration to make recommendations for additions and reductions in programs and for adding or discontinuing positions? Moved by Robert, second. Second by Corey. Okay, Dr. Hillman, can you make some comments?
Yes, this is the standard resolution that the district has been taking around this time of the year for decade and a half, if not longer. And it really just formalizes from the board's perspective that you're moving forward with program recommendations. In many years, that is, we might be doing one class here or there, but in the last couple of years, it really has governed our authority to be able to work on those budget adjustments that will be coming forward. So it's a standard resolution, really just giving weight to the staffing process.
Comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed? Okay, motion passes. I'm sorry?
Roll call vote,
Oh,
resolution.
I'm sorry. You need to go ahead and facilitate that resolution.
Butler,
Aye.
Coleman,
Aye.
Gerwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Nelson,
Bye.
Cornell.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution passes. Item 8, items for information. We have an enrollment report.
Yes, and so I want to point out one item in the enrollment report. You remember last month that when we talked about this, we discussed that we had dropped quite a bit from 3742 to 3723 in that full-time only line. And I give you a few reasons why that was. And then in this further discussions with our student information system coordinator, I've been doing enrollment reports for a long time. And in the last couple of years, I've had to come to you a few times and say, okay, we just learned something that is different that affected the enrollment report. I want to be clear that the MARS system and the system that we use for funding is all taken care of on the backside. This enrollment report is designed to give you a regular update about how are we progressing toward based on our projections. So since the pandemic, this is the third time that I've had to come to you and say, hey, we just want you to know that there was some things that we continue to learn about how we're reporting students in some of these new environments. And in this case, if you look at the bottom of the enrollment report, you're going to notice that it says previous enrollments did not include part-time students between NHS and Portage. So this is a fairly new phenomenon that has happened in the last year, actually more so this year, where we're having students who might be taking most of their courses at the high school, but now have enrolled in Portage for a couple of courses. And so what happens is the way that the system runs the report is that they don't look like they are full-time at either school. So that report has been fixed to be able to make sure it captured those students. So you'll notice that we bounced back this month to above Val's projection. So sorry, Val, that we went below that projection for 1 month. But now we're most of that back up to 3735 is really just that fix of making sure that those students who enrolled in both Portage and the high school are properly calculated. We have been giving enrollment reports for a long time, and we just have had a run of things as we have been working on some of these new enrollment strategies to make sure we're presenting you with the right. And Chris Nessett wanted me to assure you that all of the funding mechanisms were not, that was all appropriate. It was just the way that we were presenting it in the spreadsheet. So I apologize for that. We now believe that we have this month-to-month piece corrected. This is why we do a month-to-month piece. And so we can capture things like this along the way. So I apologize for, that piece last month, but we uncovered it and we have determined how we're moving ahead.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the board members? Jeff?
Yeah, just briefly on the enrollment report. In the big nine, I mean, do you do comparisons between schools to really see what's going on? And do you have any comments on that?
What I would say is many school districts are in the declining enrollment phase. It's substantial. A number of other districts are in the same boat as we are, where they're seeing year over year decline in enrollment. You are seeing there are some outliers where there is growth. You are seeing some, typically in some suburban districts where the housing boom is still there, but we are seeing a number of outstate districts, including large outstate regional centers who are experiencing, it makes our enrollment decline look like very little compared to what they're dealing with.
So is that, I mean, people are moving or?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I mean, everyone is being affected by the birth rate, right? So the birth rate is impacting our schools. Now we're starting to hear some improvement in the birth rate, right? So those students aren't quite here yet. Some of it is students choosing something else. So it could be that student has chosen an online program during the pandemic that they're sticking with. It could be some growth in charter school expansion. It could be some additional homeschooling pieces. So, and then frankly, if you look at some of the enrollment things across the country, I think that this is more across the country and not necessarily here in Minnesota. There are some students where people are still trying to learn what are the choices that they're making right now. That's not what I'm hearing from our colleagues. Our colleagues are hearing that they're seeing less students matriculate into the school, and then they are seeing students who made different choices during the pandemic stay in that case. Ours, as we know, we've shown you the enrollment options reports. Ours are really the combination of the birth rate, which we had been predicting well before the pandemic, you know, going back to Hazel Reinhardt's 2015 or 16 demographic report. She brought that to you again last year. And then, of course, our lack of housing is really a struggle as well.
Anyone else? Okay, our future regular meetings are all at 6 p.m. here in the district office boardroom. These dates are Mondays, February 27, March 13, and April 10th. That's all the business that we have tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Robert, second by Jeff. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, motion carries. We are adjourned.